thank the Lord that we made another day, and we have an exciting show planned for today. We have some superstar panels, starting with our local Democrat chair's superstar politician, Myla Eldridge. Also, we have my panelists, Attorney Banks and Grimes, and we'll talk to them later, but we're going to start off today because we have the most important election in the city of Indianapolis history coming up in a couple weeks. And so I have the Democrat chairman on today to explain as to the early voting process here. Ms. Eldridge, how are you doing today, ma'am?
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, so early voting, how does that work and what should we do? I voted yesterday, by the way. Me and my family went and voted. I'm proud of that. And we went to vote. There was only 2 other people show up to vote while we were there. I said, man, this is pretty dismal.
Yeah, so Marion County a few years back transitioned to a vote center county, and also to having actually the most satellite early voting locations that we have had in the history of voting in Marion County. And so on yesterday, you probably went to the city county building, which is open now for anyone that would like to cast their ballot early. And early voting is just voting before election day, right? It's absentee voting before election day. So beginning actually the 28th of this month, Saturday, October the 28th, early voting will begin in all 9 townships. So we're fortunate to have a satellite location in all 9 townships before the actual voting day, which is November the 7th. And so since you were able to walk right in and cast your ballot and vote early, and now you don't have to worry about it on election day, you can do something else, or you can help a candidate or our great mayor that's on the ballot. It is convenient, and it's fast, and it's easy. And we have seen where Marion County voters are really, truly utilizing early voting, and especially early voting in all 9 townships.
Well, what about the fact that I was concerned, we got really a lot of negative publicity. I see that the opponent, Shreve, is spending what looked like about $15 million, and there's a lot of negative ads. And what was surprising to me is that when I looked at his corporation, he had no diversity. So he's running for a city that's got 40% diversity. And it seemed like he get people of color coming out, but he didn't hire them. It was just shocking to me that you have such a, it seemed like false advertisement almost, what he's doing.
Well, and that's one thing about Mayor Hogsett that we know is a fact, that he has hired, or I think he has had probably the most diverse cabinet that we have seen in past mayor offices. So again, I would just encourage voters, number one, to pay attention, do your homework, and also early vote. Those are ballots. When you early vote, those are ballots that are just waiting to be counted on election day. But the other candidate has spent quite a millions actually of dollars on TV ads, and has not really even talked about policies or issues, whereas Mayor Hogsett has, you can see what he has done. The proof is in the pudding. You can see what he has done to grow the city and everything that he is continuing to do to improve our city. And so, again, I think it's very, very important that when you see a candidate that has to put negative commercials and mudsling when it comes to an election, you need to pay attention to that, because I wouldn't believe the hype.
Well, I agree with you, because it's almost as false as advertisement. He said he's going to do great on crime, but he's creating a crime with his political party. What they did is that they passed a law to let any morons have guns. So now we have high concentration of guns in our community, people shooting each other, but they're responsive to this. They say that anyone could carry guns. So we took away gun legislation. And so now you don't register for guns. You don't have to do background checks, none of that stuff. It's got to be the dumbest thing we've ever seen. And then at the same time says, oh, I'm going to attack crime. Well, you're creating crime. In other words, it's insulted. But the second thing, though, the political party may be now led by the most corrupt politician in American history. I was watching the news, I'm gonna cover this in our show yesterday. We saw the head of his political party, Donald J. Trump, lawyers in Georgia basically say that he did a bunch of crimes. So his lawyers turned on him. So this is the person that Garden Street support, a guy who's got over 90 felony indictments now. It's just a ridiculous matter that now he's going to somehow come to our city and save the city when you have a corrupt political party. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like, at least I know we would have a Democratic mayor that, although he may not be able to, cast a vote over at the people's house, is what I call it, the state house. So, but at least we know that he would go over there and lobby for gun reform. And Mayor Hogsett would go over and he would lobby for women's rights, right, against and abortion rights. He would lobby for the LGBTQ plus community. And that's what we want as a community. We want someone that will go and lobby and be the voice for our concerns and the issues that are present at hand. And so, I say that this election, our democracy, it's on the ballot, and definitely next year, our democracy is on the ballot. And so, I had served as the clerk of Marion County, and every year I said, this election is important. And I tell you, this year, this election is important. So I just encourage everyone, to knock on doors for a better tomorrow. Donate money to Democratic candidates, to the mayoral candidate for a better tomorrow. Make phone calls for a better tomorrow. Just vote for a better tomorrow. And how can you do that? You use your voice and you vote Democrat.
Well, now, one final thought. You serve in multiple capacity. You're like the state vice Democrat chair. What are job titles you currently hold? You're probably a hardest working person in Indiana now. How many jobs you have?
I serve right now currently as your Marion County auditor. I serve as the vice chair for Indiana Democratic Party. That's the state party. And then I'm also the county chair for Marion County.
Well, keep up the good work. You must work 24/7. I know that you're one of the hardest working politicians in America. So just keep working and we'll support you. Thank you for joining our show today.
Thank you. Have a great day. And as I told you earlier, as your auditor, I'm on my way to a property tax town hall. So God bless you and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Now, I got my superstar panelists starting with Attorney Banks. Attorney Banks, this week, I watched in horror in what happened in Georgia. And here's something that struck a nerve with me. The lawyers for the former President Trump, basically, Kenneth Cheeseborough did a plea agreement this week that basically says that his client committed a lot of crimes. But here's what was shocking. I recorded part of it, but here's what was said.
18th of 2020 and January 6th of 2021, the defendant and co-conspirators, Donald John Trump, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, John Charles Eastman, Ray Stallings Smith III, Robert David Cheeley, Michael Roman, and others entered into a criminal conspiracy to cause certain other co-conspirators, including David James Schaefer, Sean Micah Thrasher Steele, and Kathleen Austin Latham, to falsely hold themselves out as the duly elected and qualified electors for the president and vice president from Georgia following the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election. The objection.
Now, Attorney Banks, nowhere in American history have I seen lawyers agree to testify against their clients. This is something, when I went to law school, that's unfathomable. I mean, I don't get this. Lawyers now are testifying against their crime and saying that their client is a crime boss.
Good morning, Attorney Lee. And that's absolutely right. These are stunning developments. However, totally expected. When we first saw this indictment and the detail and thoroughness of Fani Willis in bringing this 41 count indictment, I believe it's over 91 pages, against 19 defendants, including the former president's lawyers. You mentioned Kevin Chesbrough, who pleaded guilty to one felony count of conspiracy, which unsurprisingly, some of these defendants are flipping now to avoid going to prison. She has alleged that they engaged in racketeering under the RICO Act, under Georgia law, where they have conspired to falsely overthrow a legal election. And specifically, Kevin Chesbrough pled guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit filing the false electors documents. And that's count number 15 of the original indictment. And so in exchange, he doesn't want to go to prison, ultimately, Attorney Lee. So in exchange for his testimony in the trial, and we anticipate that he will testify against other defendants, co-defendants, including Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani, he will avoid prison, and he'll pay a fine of about, I think I read $5,000, again, in exchange for his testimony in the trial. And so this was exactly the strategy that attorney Fani Willis orchestrated, and now we're seeing the how this is playing out.
What was shocking to me, though, is that their process is done a little bit differently from what I recall. I don't do criminal law, but back in the early 80s, I did, some criminal work, 82, 83, and then I did civil. But in their jurisdiction, the prosecutor and the defense attorney and the defendant controls the show. So the judge asked him how to wish to plead, and then the prosecutor reads off each of the charges, and then he agreed to them, right? And what was weird about that is when he agreed that he was guilty to the crime of the charge, and she gave the factual basis was so devastating. It just, there are 30% of the people in the country who believe what Donald Trump says, 30%, right? Based on statistics I've seen on the networks. Mm-hmm. Well, here's a case in court where his lawyer says that my client is a chronic liar, my client, Donald J. Trump, is a criminal. And here's what he did. His lawyer pleaded guilty to that. And that's why it was so shocking to me that we would have a lawyer says, it was just devastating when I watched this, and you can see it on the internet. So now, even before the trial, you have these daunting admissions of criminality from the former president of the United States. It's just shocking to me. I don't understand. I don't think people grasp how significant this is. This never happened in American history before. We've had such grave type thing happen by a head of our country. And so now his co-conspirators are all writing them out and now turning on him. But the most critical part of this is that these are the lawyers who actually advance these idiotic theories. And so their theories in which he adopted, they're saying that he's a criminal for doing it.
Absolutely, Attorney Lee. Kevin Chesbro was the lawyer who actually authored this plan, and he drafted a series of memorandums which laid out this scheme. And in these memorandums, he stated that and acknowledged that this plan was very controversial and that it was likely to be rejected by the United States Supreme Court. So this is his lawyer masterminding this scheme to create these false statements, these fake electors. And so, but again, once they were indicted and we read this very methodical, thorough, stunning indictment, it was clear to me, and you've stated many times, Attorney Lee, that former President Trump's own statements are being used, against him, and rightfully so. I mean, you'll recall that this started with his call to quote, to the Secretary of State to quote, I need to find 11,870 votes, right?
Yes.
And so, but again, you're absolutely right. Never before am I aware in American history where his own lawyers are now flipping and will ultimately testify in this case. And then, of course, Sidney Powell, one of the other attorneys, she pled guilty to 6 misdemeanors, and she will get probation and will avoid prison time as well.
Well, let me go and get one caller real quickly, Imhotep. Imhotep, this thing about the former president lawyer slipping on it, that quite frankly disturbed me, because I've never seen lawyers be able to testify about the wrongdoers of their clients. I've never seen it happen before. By rules of ethics, we're not allowed to do that. So this whole development is troublesome to me. And, we got the president doing things that his own recording showed that he did, but now the person who helped him to develop the plan are saying what he did was a crime.
I've never heard anything like this before either. My mother has told me she's never heard it. We just were talking about it maybe an hour ago, and it's the ethics of the legal profession. I'm in the medical profession. We know our ethics, and just in a life, in almost 58 years of living, I've never seen lawyers do this. I watched. I think it was what was John Gotti's lawyer name? Was it F. Lee Bailey that went to jail protecting John Gotti? Didn't he go to prison protecting John Gotti back then? He didn't they put F. Lee Bailey in jail back then? Was it F. Lee Bailey? I think I'm correct on that. But I've never heard it. Johnny Cochran spoke of things, but he never, was compelled. It's crazy. I want to ask you all a couple things, and I'll leave you at that. It's that we have a Supreme Court took up a qualified immunity case. Sylvia Gonzalez, a city councilwoman out of Texas, the city, it's about 45 miles from Dallas, east, some name of, I can't remember the name. Anyway, she was arrested by the police there because, of course, she was putting out mailers against one of the opponents who was a police supporter. So they arrested her, talking about she was disseminating government material. Prosecutor, of course, dropped everything, and then she sued on First Amendment rights. The district court sided with her, taking away the qualified immunity from the police. Then the Fifth Circuit Court, of importance of voting again, because I'm going somewhere with that, the importance of voting again, people, the Fifth Circuit Court struck her down, and then she appealed again, and the Supreme Court decided to take it. I was shocked with that. I don't know if you guys heard about that. That blew me away. And then number two, it's been a lot of tongue lashing and a lot of disdain and a lot of information about the Louisiana election last week with Greg Landry, the devout racist Trump supporter, winning the governorship down there. 19% of eligible black voters voted. According to the state numbers, only I think 34% of the eligible voters in Louisiana voted, period. DNC is being blamed for no ground support, many other things down there. You've got people on the ground down there, Roland Martin. It's just been a lot of back and forth. I wanted your opinion on that too, and what did you think about, if you're familiar with the Supreme Court taking up that qualified immunity case? And thanks for taking my call.
Good morning, Nathaniel. May I interrupt a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
I believe back in Mike Tyson's case, Desiree Washington's lawyer went back to Boston, wherever they were from, and asked the bar, could he testify against his client? Remember? Do you remember that? And the bar and told them why. And it was because Desiree Washington and her father was lying to the court about a man's freedom, and it was affecting a man's freedom. And the bar looked into the matter, and I think the question was public policy, the sanctity of confidentiality between a lawyer and a client. It had to be judged to a man's freedom. And the bar gave him permission to come back and testify in your court in Indiana. Am I wrong so far?
Well, I vaguely remember part of that. I know you.
I read about that. Yeah, I got that. So anyway, he came back. He had permission to testify to violate public policy because of the sanctity of the relationship between an attorney and client. And the judge would not let him testify. My understanding, the judge said, no, he could not testify on behalf of Mike Tyson that his client, Desiree Washington, or her father was lying, because in truth, they got on the stand and said that they retained a lawyer, or she retained a lawyer just to handle the media. But in truth, the lawyer was for getting her a contract with the media, or a new or magazine, or write a book to make her money off of the case, and also to represent her against Mike Tyson. So it is a strong public policy, and the judge would not let him testify, even though it was in the interest of justice and for a person's freedom. So in this situation, I think the judge is going to have to decide whether or not these lawyers can testify.
Well, it's kind of, I think, I looked into that earlier. I think it's a bad policy to allow a lawyer to testify against their clients, because we hold these secrets, we're required to hold them until we die and
Right.
beyond our grave. So even clients' records, we have to make sure they're properly destroyed. Our ethics rules say so, so we can't let any of the client's confidential or secret comes out. Here, what was odd, they made an exception based on common criminality and conspiracy. So they came out with some exceptions, I suppose, to allow the lawyers to testify against their client. But what I'm troubled by, Milton, in all honesty, is that it was these idiot lawyers who advanced these criminal theories to their client. So it was a lawyer who sold their client, Donald Trump, that this process, even though everybody in the world that ever went to law school knows illegal, was permissible. So I don't know, but the lawyers in the White House say, this is dumb. You got all these lawyers that tell you correctly, and you're gonna believe these airhead lawyers? I mean, it just dumbfounded me.
And what we're seeing play out just turns the fundamental traditional doctrine of attorney-client privilege on its head.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm concerned about this. So now, and the biggest complaint it blew up the internet this week, is that these wealthy lawyers are basically not being treated the way that the other Capitol rioters were treated, because they're the ones that create all this false narrative that fueled the attempted overthrow of the federal government. They were successful for a couple of hours in overthrowing the federal government. Let's face it. They took over Capitol Hill. They were in the chambers. They took over the offices. You know, it wasn't simply riots and looting. It was an overthrow of the federal government. And they were successful for at least a couple hours. And so the part about that is that these lawyers gave the fuel to these participants to engage in this unlawful conduct. And like the judges said, now it seems to me that the sentences, although I know the testimony is devastating for the rest of the defendant based on the evidence the prosecutor read into the record, when they read into the record, the lawyers pled guilty to all these people who were in the chain of command were engaged in a co-conspiracy. So they read this, and it was shocking to me when they went through step by step as to what they were pleading guilty to. They basically not only ratted out Donald Trump, but they ratted out Rudy Giuliani and other folks. And so I look to see in the near future that a lot more of these people are going to take some plea bargains right away. And but it looked like the way this thing going to shape out is that Rudy Giuliani looking at an extended prison time in Georgia. You don't think so, Milton?
I don't know. I hate to be the pessimist on all of this, but I don't see Giuliani or any of them doing a lot of prison time. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just thinking about Trump. But I will say this, that there are different standards for different folks. A friend of mine, old lawyer, white lawyer, once told me when I got into a case where the lawyers had made a mistake and that their client confess or admit to a crime involving the FBI, where he had lied to the FBI on the telephone. And there was a lot of surrounding facts to that conversation and communication, which would have given him a defense. And so we were looking into the chances of success in doing a motion to withdraw his plea after he had pled guilty. And we were successful in the Ninth Circuit. The trial judge wouldn't let us do it, but the Ninth Circuit remanded it back to the trial judge and said, yes, he had a defense that should have been presented. And so what came out of that experience for me, and this was a celebrity film director out here in LA that had admitted lying to the FBI. What came out of it was a definition given to me by this friend of mine who is in his 90s now, but a renowned lawyer, criminal lawyer. He said, Milton, these boys are what you call carriage lawyers. I said, what is that? He said, you remember back in the old West, carriage, people didn't walk in the mud, the carriage carried you from here to there. They're not street lawyers like most criminal lawyers. They don't get into the middle of fighting for justice. And I've seen throughout my experience, a lot of these carriage lawyers who do a lot of white collar crime work, and they don't do the blood and guts work of the standard criminal lawyer or public defender. I don't know if I'm making sense to y'all, but that's been my observation. They have a different set of rules they operate by, and not like the rest of us that have to abide by. And so this may be a situation where that principle apply.
Well, in terms of what you said, it's pretty clear to me. You're saying, I guess, wealthy, certain type lawyers escape criminality versus the ordinary citizen.
And Yeah, yeah. And oftentimes they don't represent clients with the zeal that regular criminal lawyers represent their rights and their freedom. And they plead a lot of cases. I can give you the names of some of them here in LA. And they make a lot of money, a lot of money, because they think they know the person to be known for this at this position and that position. It's a different law. Different
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Attorney Grimes, that I don't anticipate that Giuliani is going to spend any significant time in prison. In fact, I believe that ultimately, sooner or later, he's going to take a plea.
Yeah.
And then to your point, look at Tom Girardi in California.
Right.
And, you know, all of the illegal conduct and fraud that he was engaged in until it was finally, you know, established, you know, that he was engaged in criminal activity for many, many years.
Right.
Wow. Well, it'd be fascinating to see, because I've been watching the January 6th rioters and planners. I saw like the leader Torres, what he got 23 years. And so the people that planned the actual takeover of federal government, they got between 15 to 23 years, somewhere in that range. And that's was less than what the government wanted. I see the government is appealing the sentence, want to get 33 years. But now, the thing we got to remember is that we're only dealing with the Georgia state crime. And in the federal case, these folks were unindicted co-conspirators, right? Yes. So it'd be interesting to see what occurs at the federal level. And in terms of strategy, I don't understand the Smith indictment process versus the Lewis. Lewis was indict everybody, and then people going to start flipping and writing out other people, which seemed like a very good strategy. Smith, on the other hand, the guy doing the federal special counsel, special prosecutor, he only indicted Donald Trump in DC and did not indict the other folks that the grand jury recommended should have been indicted. I didn't get the strategy there, Milton. I know you do a lot more. What's the strategy behind this, only indicting one person, even though the grand jury recommended other folks?
Well, I hadn't kept up with that. I've been terribly busy this week. They hope to make these, maybe they hope to make these people witnesses or pressure them into it. I'd have to look at it closer to really give my best answer. The grand jury recommended he indict A through F, and he only indicted A. That's what we're saying, right?
Yes.
Unless there's some immunity that was granted to these people to get them to testify, and their lawyers have worked that out, I can't come up with a better answer right now.
Well, Fanning, the prosecutor in Orlando, was criticized by indicting, what, 17, 8? I've lost track of the number of people got indicted down there.
19 total.
19.
I mean, it was 19?
Including Trump.
Well, thank you very much. So she was criticized for indicting everyone. But what we find out is, as soon as these folks is faced with a Fulton County jury, you know, they were going to start jury selection on Friday, they folded. They folded.
Mm-hmm.
They threw in the towel, and it was shocking to me what they pled guilty to. You know, see, people only focus on the criminal charges, but not the probable cause indictment that was read by the prosecutor. And when I listened to the lengthy rendition by the prosecutor as to what they were pleading guilty to and what they agreed to do, it was shocking to me because it basically laid out a roadmap to say that what they were charged with, they're guilty as hell, including the former president. And that was the part that was the most surprising to me. And so now they're required to cooperate in future prosecution against their co-conspirators. I think that what we likely to see as soon as they do the next jury trial, I think a lot more of those folks are going to fold.
Is that the agreement they made in their plea to cooperate?
Yes. Yes, to cooperate and to provide testimony in the case once it goes to trial. And we've seen.
Well, they can cooperate, but they can't violate public policy.
Well, they have to answer questions.
Yeah, they can answer questions. But I will object to a question that involves confidentiality of my client to that witness. So I don't know how the court's going to deal with some of these issues to protect the rights of the accused.
Chesbro's lawyer was interesting because Chesbro is being alleged to be a quote snitch, right? And he's saying, no, my client's not a snitch. My client told the truth. He accepted accountability for his actions. Mm-hmm. So that's an admission from my perspective. You know, you've seen, but again, it flies in the face of traditional attorney-client privilege law. Mm-hmm. And all the points you're making, Attorney Grimes and Lee, about, okay, so when Chesbro testifies, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing that testimony play out if the trial is going to be televised. But what we're seeing is two different approaches. We're seeing Jack Smith, who has a very, very narrowly focused case, right? Where I think he may have only named 5? And then we have Fannie Willis taking a different approach where she's named 19. And I think that some of those unnamed defendants in the Jack Smith federal case, that they're going to flip as well. Some of the named and unnamed are going to flip. And we're going to see an interplay and interaction between the Georgia litigation as well as the federal litigation moving forward. That's my prediction.
Well, Milton, Vanita, it does raise one interesting evidentiary issue, right? That is statement of a party opponent. So under our rules of evidence that is adopted almost in every state, there is a rule called the hearsay rule. So statements made out of court are not admitted in a courtroom setting for a party. The exception to that, of course, is statement of a party opponent. So a statement of a party is an exception to the hearsay rule by making them all party in this conspiracy theory. And when you listen to what he pled guilty to in the probable cause affidavit that support the conviction, they were smart enough to craft an indictment that will make their statements an exception to the hearsay rule. Now, the other part you raise is the criminality section in terms of can a lawyer testify against his own client? Now, I thought about that. The problem with that is that the president did have lawyers. They were called White House lawyers. He had an entire army of lawyers at the White House. Those were his lawyers who told him that this was illegal. But
that still shouldn't come in. They're still his lawyers, and his communication with his lawyers is his communication with his lawyers.
Right.
That's the goal line here. I mean, whether the White House lawyers or Doodoo House lawyers, they are his lawyers, and that confidentiality, it should remain intact. That's the golden rule.
I agree with you. I agree. That's accurate. But those lawyers who testified before the January 6th committee, they did not give statements that Donald Trump has said to the committee. I watched part of that, right? But This is different. these lawyers that are pleading guilty weren't really his White House lawyers.
They weren't really his White House lawyers. What were they?
I'm not quite sure.
These lawyers that are now flipping, well, great point. I was about to say they were his hired lawyers, but Sidney Powell was on the team, right?
Mhm. I mean, you've seen oftentimes in films and movies, well, give me $1 or give me a quarter. Okay, now I'm your lawyer. So that takes care of that confidentiality rule in the theater. But I don't even think you have to give a penny. It is, I go into an office or I'm on the corner or I'm talking to my lawyer. That's confidentiality unless we can see that somebody is listening in and we ignore them, but otherwise it's protected communication.
Unless there's a communication outside of the, quote, control group. I mean, there's very established law on attorney-client privilege.
Well, what
And
happened?
very rarely seen attorneys, to your point, that have testified against their own client. I mean, that's just something that we don't typically see in the litigation process.
So for our audience, you heard the term crime, fraud, deception, but if you watch the January 6th, even in that context, they did not allow the White House lawyers to give testimony as to what the president did or said. So even in that circumstance, like for example, if a client come to a lawyer for representation and the client robbed a bank, so the lawyer can't reveal, even to the point of death, what the client told him about the prior crime.
Right.
Deception, of course, relate to future crime. If the client say, I'm going to rob a bank next week, then that's a deception, is a public policy deception that allows the lawyer to prevent harm to society. So that's different, right? And so you have the same technical evidentiary issue in terms of the crime, fraud, deception. So these evidence rules going to be interesting, but there's one big advantage that the people in Georgia have over the other lawyers. They do this every day. They took 2 years to put together a case against these folks. They did this lengthy indictment, and it turns out everyone in the chain of command has been involved in this process. The judge worked with Fannie Willis in they got the #1 expert in Georgia to deal with this so-called RICO type statute. And so this plan that they have to charge 19 people with conspiracy apparently was a brilliant idea, as it turns out, because you have the two biggest actors the guy who came up with this idiotic plan, who's now ratting out his co-conspiracy along with his client, the former president. Just incredible chain of events.
I agree that Fannie Willis is brilliant in her strategy, as we're seeing play out, and particularly this week. And I'm wondering, other exceptions to the hearsay rule, what about excited utterances or recorded recollections? We don't want to go down the road of exceptions to the hearsay rule today, but I was looking at some of the exceptions and just wondering, recorded, recollections, for example, many of the statements that Trump has made, via the public media.
Well, that's the thing about it. His prior statement that's been recorded would be admissible. Now, under rules of evidence, you could try to keep out presidential statement under rules of evidence 403, right. Things. This is clearly presidential. But based on the ruling that the judges made in the current Chesborough case and Sidney Powell case, it appears to be a non-starter because they made a number of evidentiary rulings and the judge shot them down because this judge, who was appointed by a Republican governor, he worked in prosecuting people also in these RICO type cases. So you have a judge who's not been on the bench a long time that have really set of litigation skills in this field. And so what would be the traditional legal arguments that you do brief and brief after brief after brief, he makes a decision on them right away, and which is shocking in sense that, you know, you got a lot of lawyers raising a lot of legal issues, and he makes rulings that appears to be pretty consistent and accurate. And so with that background, I think Milton, Vanita, I think that the folks that don't take a plea, I think they could be found guilty. I do think some of them are going to end up in prison.
We shall see.
Okay. But the next issue, there's a lot of things going on, and I don't want to make it all about Trump, but I watched the New York fraud trial, same thing. I mean, everybody is writing out Trump, so be interested to see what happened in the civil fraud trial. Looked like that's one he's going to lose because they got incredible evidence against him. But the big news issue, of course, is I don't understand, and maybe you do, Vanita. I watched in horror when the Hamas attacked the Israelis, just murdered those people. And what just was particularly brutal and gruesome to me, this woman was behind a car and the Hamas guy came, took a gun and shot her in the head. It was just a cowardly act, and just, I could not stand to watch it. And so now I've been watching, I woke up this morning on TV and there's worldwide protests. The Palestinian people are saying that the Israel response is overtly aggressive. And I thought about it, and this is such a complex subject matter, and I don't fully understand it, you know, but in our country, we have terrorists, the white supremacists, KKK. If they do a horrific act, should someone then come and bomb a country and kill other folks in the country who has nothing to do? Because we don't control what they do. It's up to law enforcement. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, first, we've been watching a humanitarian crisis. And, you know, there's a lot of history underlying this conflict. And I heard one commentator say that history has been, quote, written in blood, and that both sides blame the other, and that, you know, each side has its own interpretation of the history, and that, you know, this is one land. But what's really amazing to me is the location and the topography of the Gaza Strip. We're talking about can you imagine a 25-mile strip of land on which 2 million people live? It's about 139 square miles, twice the size of Washington, D.C. And it's the third, I understand, most densely populated area in the world. Densely populated, predominantly urban, and over half of the population are children. And we've seen and heard that 1,500 children have been killed in this latest evil carnage. I don't believe that people should be viewed as, quote, collateral damage in war. It's a very, very complex situation, very, very delicate. We're seeing that countries across the Middle East are protesting. It's my understanding that there is a summit in Cairo today to try to potentially talk about, you know, how do we come to the table and talk through this situation and try to see if we can come up with some type of humanitarian resolution. I know it's very, 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 very complex. And so, but what we're seeing play out are civilians being murdered on both sides as a result of this conflict that has been waging for many, many, many years. And so I'll stop there. What are your thoughts, Attorney Grimes?
That I can't trust the media representation of the cruelty necessarily that's going on there. I'm sure for every incident where a woman has been shot in the head by a Palestinian soldier or terrorist, another woman of Palestinian descent was shot in the head by a Jewish militant or terrorist. So I don't know, Nate, that we can decide this matter because of the horror of one person's propaganda. I don't know how this thing is going to be settled. I've heard, read, and listened to the two different positions, but I don't know that one side is more brutal than the other, Nate, from what I gathered from this war. This killing has been going on for years, and there's been inhumane treatment from both sides to each other. So I don't know who owns the trophy for the most brutality between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
What I do know is that most people just want to live in peace.
Right.
And that it appears that from what we see, Milton, that most of the people, again, that we're seeing on television, to your point, that are being killed at this point are civilians.
From both sides.
On both sides, on both sides.
Yeah, it's
Right.
a terrible, terrible tragedy. I wish I could acquire better understanding of what is actually going on. I saw that Hamas was 1% of the population, but yet they took control of the government. And it made me think that 47% of the people in the country try to take control of the United States of America through a small band of looters. And so I don't know whether or not there's any parallel, but it just seemed to me the sheer brutality of this process is just mind-boggling. And then they were saying that the Hamas people, rebels, whoever they are, who took control, they're using these captured Israelis people as human shields. And so it's just a terrible tragedy. And I hope that it ends sooner rather than later. I have a lot of Jewish friends that are really saddened by this set of events. I don't know a lot of Palestinians because we're in the Midwest, but I've been watching on TV that they're really upset about the bombing. And one person made a good point. I watched it this morning. He was saying, wait a second, we're not the one that caused this problem. These people are our enemies too, but we're being punished as though we caused this. We did not. And I thought that was an important statement, but hopefully the carnage ends soon. But was there one final news story that I missed that was relevant this week? Was there something else you had raised? That was essentially it. Next week, we'll do a follow-up on these major litigation that's going on in our country. Of course, there are a number of issues that are important in terms of cases going before U.S. Supreme Court. But we've seen a significant departure on some key civil rights issues by the Supreme Court, such as affirmative action, And I need to cover part of that because we've begun to see some of the effects of that now. And then, so these are important topics. And next week, I hope you can join us again, and we're going to cover these. I'd like to thank our special guest today, the Honorable Myra Eldridge, who's the Marion County Auditor. She's Vice Chair of the State Democratic Party and the local Marion County Democratic Chairperson. And also our superstar panel with Attorney Vanita Banks and Milton Grimes. So thank you all for listening to our show today. And don't forget to join us next week. We're going to cover some important topics. And also, don't forget to go out and vote. Vote as though this is the last time you ever vote in your life, because this election in Indianapolis is probably the most important one we ever had. We had the greatest diversity ever in our history in terms of our administration. Let's keep going in a positive direction. Thank you, everyone, and have a blessed day.
Wow.
Thank you.